So in Infinite Forbidden, we received a rather interesting board breaker by the name of Vesper Girsu, and I realized that it never really saw any play so far. The card is extremely technical, and even though it might not necessarily be good right now, it still has a lot of potential for the future. Anyways, the card is a quickly spell card that can only be used when your opponent controls 2 or more monsters than you do, similar to Waybridge. This card then gives your opponent the choice to send as many monsters he controls to the graveyard in order to choose which kind of handicap he wants. He could theoretically send 0 monsters to the grave, but then comes the drawbacks associated with that decision. If your opponent now has 0 monsters on the board, you have to halve your life points. If your opponent only has 1 monster on the field, then your opponent gains 2,000 life points. And if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters after you use this card, then your opponent will be at a disadvantage. With 2 monsters on your opponent's field, your opponent will have to banish his entire hand face up until the end phase. This can be really good to get rid of all the hand traps that your opponent might have, actually. And with 3, 4, or 5 monsters, so assuming that your opponent maybe didn't want to get rid of anything, your opponent cannot use monster effects until the end of the turn. So we will be comparing this card to other board breakers and try to figure whether or not this card is worth playing as a whole. So obviously this card has to compete with cards like Dark Ruler, Forbidden Droplet, Metal Chonus, Super Poly, Evenly Matched, and Triple Tactic Talent. Every card I just mentioned other than Talent and Evenly cannot really be responded to or negated, which is basically a characteristic I deem to be almost mandatory with modern card design nowadays. Because you see, even with Baron and Warlord Savage getting banned on the most recent ban list, which was still like freaking 4 months ago, we still have way too many Omni Negates floating around in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because we replaced these 2 annoying synchros with 2 more Omni Negates in the form of Varudas and Feedsmith DS E-Ray. So yeah, this card is negatable, meaning that going second, if you only have it and nothing else, it'll just get negated and pretty much do nothing. Dark Ruler, on the other hand, is either impossible to negate or very difficult to negate if your opponent might have something like, I don't know, Abominable Chamber and Feedsmith DS E-Ray. The Yubel strategy can pretty much do that with 1 single card because they can access the Abominable Chamber using the Sharvara, and then they can use the Chamber in order to respond to the Dark Ruler, and then chain to their own Chamber with a DS E-Ray to negate the Dark Ruler. That's what people have been doing with Dragon decks using Hard Red Dragon Archfiend for the longest time. Now, Varudas is not something that they always do because they do have to have a lot of resources in order to get there because it's 2 level 10 monsters, but they can still summon it, and yeah, you're gonna be in a really bad position if they have 2 Omni Negates now. But if they only have 1, then you can still use the Vesper Girsu to eat the DS E-Ray negate, and then that forces out the Abominable Chamber, and then if you also have Dark Ruler, then you negate everything including the Unchained Soul of Rage, and you basically win. In terms of power level, this card is always forcing out an interruption from your opponent because this card is insane if it resolves. There's just no way that your opponent will be willing to give up on pretty much all of his monsters. Because let's just assume for a second that Vesper Girsu resolves against a board of 5 monsters. A board of, let's say, Appaloosa, Phantom of Yubel, Unchained Soul of Rage, DDD Caesar, and Feedsmith DS E-Ray. Your opponent will obviously not get rid of 2 monsters because then he'll control 3, which means that he won't be able to use monster effects until the end of the turn, which is very good for you. However, if he has hand traps in the hand, then he might also not want to get rid of only 3 monsters because then he'll control 2 and have to banish every card in his hand until the end phase, which means goodbye to all of your hand traps. So I can see the opponent getting rid of 4 monsters so that he'll only control 1, the best one, and then he will be gaining 2,000 life points in the process. So yeah, again, this card is extremely powerful if it resolves, but if it gets its activation negated, it's not the end of the world because you can just use another one. And also, unlike Evenly, this card can be used at any moment, during any phase, during any turn, including your opponent's turn, so that you can kind of survive with it. Now, my only issue with this card is the fact that you give your opponent all the control on the outcome. Naturally, your opponent will always make the decision that is better for him and obviously worse for you. With that said, if nobody really respects this card or has a game plan against it, then this card can really catch people off guard. All it takes is for someone to send the incorrect amount of monsters from the field to the graveyard, and the game is pretty much over. And also, unlike Dark Rule and Evenly, you can use this card and then still OTK your opponent. Again, this card is not perfect because it can be naturally countered or just get negated, but this card's pretty nice in tandem with other board breakers and against decks that just spam their board with a bunch of monsters. So like I said at the start of the video, this card might still be insane one day, although I don't necessarily think that its format is right now. Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know how you feel about Vesper Girsu in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.